smaller number than the target population. Okay, there are certain steps in designing a survey, and we're going to talk about these today. First of all, you're going to write the purpose for developing the survey, and we've talked about that a little bit. Maybe I'll give you another example. I did collected some data. I had pre- and post-test surveys for a group of students who were involved in a summer program to help minorities and at-risk students develop skills they needed to be successful in STEM areas in college. So I'm going to talk about this survey from time to time. What I wanted to collect here were some demographic pieces of information. I wanted some information to show that students might be at risk, and typically this is parents' educational status or their marital status. I also asked some questions about what their background, high school experiences were, how they feel about going into college, and then what their plans were for the future. So that was my purpose and my subsections. Okay, then you're going to write the items, then you are going to edit the items, and you're going to create the survey. We're going to talk about piloting and editing the survey once we talk about the administration, which will be in the next section. Now, items will fall into three categories. They're either going to be categorical, continuous, or open-ended. I've given you two examples of categorical items. In the categorical items, generally depend on there's either the option to check only one item. For example, if you have gender, you're either male or female, so you can check one or the other of those. But you might have items where the categories, more than one category applies. So for example, I might want to know what grades teachers have taught in the past. So here I've listed elementary and middle school grades K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And of course, many teachers have taught more than one grade. So I've indicated here check all that apply. Sometimes you will get surveys where you ask them to check just one thing and they check multiple items, but that's just happens. Next we have continuous items, and here we have numerical responses, we have rankings, we have ratings, we have Likert type items, and we have semantic differentials. Now, numeric responses are responses where you simply want a number. So for example, we might ask what's your name, or what's your age rather, what's your annual income, how many years have you been teaching. So these are, so you're going to give your response. You may be 32 years old or whatever. Sometimes we'll take these items and we'll do what we'll call blocking. Sometimes people are income is a little bit of a sensitive item for many people, and they may not be readily, actually age could be a little sensitive too, they might not be ready to just report what their income is. So sometimes it's good to block items. So here in the second item I've got here, what is your annual income, check 1. I've got 0 to 20,000, 20,001 to 40, 40 to 60, and then more than 60. Notice I put the 01 in there to make sure that there's not an overlap here. Now when you do this, you really want to be careful about where you make your blocks. For example, was 20,000 a good cutoff point? Are you looking for people at or below the poverty line? What constitutes your middle category? How many categories do you want? A lot of this is going to be a subjective decision on your part, and it's going to be based so on knowledge you will have of the people that you're wanting to generalize to. We can also have rankings. Rankings are not as commonly used type of item, but you still do see them. Here we want to rank which grades do you prefer to teach, and here The response says to rank from the highest preference 1 to the lowest preference, which is 6. So here's an example where you could rank which grades you prefer to teach. So you get what the highest preference is and also what the lowest preference is. What you'll see much more often is ratings that are on some sort of continuum. For example, I feel burnt out on my job. The responses here are never, occasionally, sometimes, often, usually, almost all the time. So this is an example where you're going to rate a STEM, in this case job burnout, on a continuum. Okay, here are some examples of Likert type items, and Likert type items are one of the most commonly used survey formats that you will see ever. I'm sure you've taken tons of these yourself. Now these are 2 items that I used in the survey for the STEM students. The quality of my high school science classes was very good. Strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. In the next question, I believe in my ability to succeed in a science math major. Strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. Now the difference between these two is that the first one has a neutral option and the second one does not. The second one forces you to take a stand one way or the other in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with the STEM. Now there's been a lot of discussion and disagreement about whether it's good to include a neutral item or not. The upside of having a neutral item is that it affords the respondents, if they really feel neutral about it, to include that option. If you don't want your respondents to take the easy way out and not take a stand, then you should eliminate the neutral and just force them to either disagree or agree, and that might be your rationale. But one danger there is that sometimes people won't respond to the item if it doesn't have the response option that they want to include. So it's up to you. Could go either way. Both of them are fine. Probably the best thing is to think about the people you're surveying and what you really want to know. The other kind of item that we have that's a continuous item is called semantic differentials. And this is an item where you consider that there's a scale from one outcome to the other outcome. Many of you might have taken the Strong-Campbell interest inventory, and this is used for job placement purposes and career counseling. And that instrument has a number of items where they give 2 careers or 2 situations. For example, which would you prefer? Would you rather be toward an accountant or toward a firefighter? Would you rather work indoors or would you rather work outdoors? Would you rather work with many people or would you rather work by yourself? So these are the kind of items that we call semantic differentials. The next kind of questions is open-ended questions. So what could Washington School do to improve communication with parents? Here we're eliciting some sort of response from parents. You know, what do they think would be helpful here? What we want to be careful here is not to word the question in a manner so that the response is yes or no. For example, we could say, could Washington School do something to improve communication with parents? Well, probably the answer would be yes, but that doesn't really give us a lot of information. Okay, we've covered the basic building blocks of surveys. Let me give you a couple hints here for just making sure that your survey items are going to be really helpful. Make sure the stems are really clear. And avoid use of language that's vague or that's confusing or could be interpreted in multiple ways. Try and make your stems short and clean and clear. Also avoid asking more than one question per item. For example, if you happen to be let's see, if you were asking high school teachers, high school science teachers, would you prefer to teach, or I prefer to teach biology and chemistry, strongly agree, and so on. Well, you've actually got two questions in there. One is about biology, one is about chemistry. Don't make your questions too wordy. Avoid negatively worded questions. There are actually ways to include negative items in a survey, and when we get to data input, we'll talk about ways to reverse items on the computer instead of you doing it manually, where there's possibility of making mistakes. Avoid jargon. Don't use overlapping response options. For example, if you have, particularly if you have response items that are time items, like once a month, twice a month, once a week, so try and make those distinct. Try and not to have items where more than one response would be actually the correct answer for people. Make sure that the stems and the responses match. So if you're saying how often do you engage in rounds at your school, don't have your responses be strongly agree, neutral, and so on, because that doesn't really make sense with the question. So anyway, if you have any further